I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm your host, Sunil Dasgupta. This week, I talked to Adriana Hochberg, the Montgomery County official who led the writing of the county's climate action plan, which has climate activists in the county up in arms. On August 26th, student climate protesters were arrested blocking traffic in Rockville, the seat of the county government.
And if we don't get it,
shut it down!
if we don't get it,
Shut it down!
if we don't get it,
Shut it down!
we want.
Climate justice!
When do we want it?
Now!
Whose streets?
Our streets!
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 Louder. Whose streets?
Our streets!
Whose streets? If you're not planning to risk arrest, step back to the sidewalk now.
If you are new to the show, I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. It is my hope that this podcast will help those who feel left out reconnect in our local communities.
If we were alive tonight, how much would it Guthrie need?
Music for this episode comes from Seth Kibel, a Washington, D.C. and Baltimore-based musician, producer, and arranger. With an astonishing range from blues and jazz to klezmer and reggae, he performs with several bands and is the winner of 28 Washington Area Music Awards.
Is write songs of stuck in despair.
First, the news roundup. More depth than breadth this week. Fall 2021 school reopening is here, and as expected, emotions and tempers are aflare. After a spring of declaring victory over COVID, we are now dealing with the surge of the Delta variant. Montgomery County, which is one of the best vaccinated jurisdictions in all of the country, is better off than most. But we often reverse this causality. The county is better off because residents here have demanded action from their government, sometimes angrily. The back and forth of public demand and government response is not easy or magical. Right now, county parents are fuming at the school district for failing to ensure outdoor lunch for all elementary school children, the vast majority of whom are yet to be vaccinated because they are below the age of 12. Given that all students have been invited to return to in-person school and the limited cafeteria capacity, social distancing during lunch when children are going to be unmasked is hard to imagine, no matter what protocols are in place. The County Board of Education and the superintendent in public meetings recommended but did not order the use of outdoor space for lunch. But no sooner had the Board of Education session ended that principal after principal sent robocalls telling parents that they were in fact not going to do outdoor lunch, many calling the time spent outdoors dangerous without any serious explanation of what that means. The same schools are allowing outdoor recess, which is presumably not dangerous. Now, there are several schools and principals who have figured it out and are offering outdoor lunch, most with the caveat of weather permitting. Unlike neighboring Howard County Public Schools, Montgomery County Public Schools has determined that tents do not work. Left to themselves, schools and principals have made various decisions on the issue. Variability, or put another way, inequity, can be described as a central problem in Montgomery County Public Schools, which is now the 14th largest in all of the United States. Just like test scores and programming and capital expenditure, it does seem that schools with better homeschool partnerships are the ones offering outdoor lunch. Schools that are not offering outdoor lunch appear to have ineffective processes of community input, which, to go back to the idea of causality, has made Montgomery County safer. MCPS is offering a virtual academy, which has continued to accept students this week despite having set a public application deadline of July 2nd. Expect virtual academy applications to grow if the Delta surge continues, but Virtual Academy has not publicly announced that it is accepting new applications, which is cause for considerable concern. Several other problems lurk behind the front burner issues. Teacher shortage is worse than ever. To take one example, math teachers in middle and high schools as of August 24th, there were between 15 and 20 positions unfilled, not including positions where long-term substitutes were already in place. Back-of-the-envelope calculations suggest that there are about 450 to 500 math teachers in all of MCPS middle and high schools taken together. So the percentage is actually quite small. But keep in mind that typically this number at this time in a regular school year is 2 to 3 vacancies. Teacher and paraeducator shortages in special education have been a long-term problem made worse recently as well. Given how late the Board of Education released its plans, teachers have the option of resigning without prejudice right up to August 30th, the start of the school year. Normally, teachers can resign without prejudice through July 15th. Leaving with prejudice means a teacher breaks their contract with MCPS, which could lead to the loss of Maryland certification and is considered to be a negative for rehiring. In non-school news, the redevelopment of Lake Forest Mall in Gaithersburg appears to have hit a snag, reminiscent of the efforts in the early 1990s to revitalize downtown Silver Spring. The owners of the core of the property, a South Carolina company called WRS, disagree with the master plan approved by the city of Gaithersburg that provides the parameters of redevelopment that can take place there. Meanwhile, WRS is having trouble acquiring the anchor properties at the mall, one of which is owned by a firm called Northwood, which also wants to redevelop the whole property. 16 miles south in Chevy Chase, the redevelopment process for the 4-H National Center on Connecticut Avenue is moving along quite nicely. The town of Chevy Chase has set out some pretty tough redevelopment conditions and hired a consultant to protect the interest of the municipality. 2 development companies seem to be interested. This is shaping up to be a tale of 2 developments. We will be following both. 2 assistant chief administrative officers in the Ulrich administration in the county, Joe Fletcher and Caroline Sturgis, have left recently to move to Florida. Sturgis was replaced by Earl Stoddard, the former director of the county emergency department. No replacement for Fletcher yet. The third and longest serving of the original Ulrich administration assistant chief administrative officers is my guest this episode. Adriana Hochberg was recently named the county's chief climate officer. She goes by Climate Czarina on Twitter. You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. Adriana Hochberg, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you so much for having me.
You led the climate action plan for the county. It's nearly a 400-page document that I read. What are the 3 or 4 things that you want county residents to get out of it?
So I would say there are some three main pieces of the climate action plan that I think are kind of breakthrough or are quite innovative about it. The first is that our plan centers racial equity and social justice. And it's not just a chapter in the plan, although we do have a chapter in the plan that provides a history and context on historic inequities and environmental injustices taking place in the county and nationally. But throughout the entirety of the plan, we have embedded what we call equity enhancing measures to ensure that as we are implementing climate action, we're doing so in a way that enhances and supports equity. We also, in the plan, we developed some vulnerability maps using several different factors and variables, including the CDC Social Vulnerability Index, in order to enable us to visually map out and pinpoint locations in our county of the different communities and neighborhoods that are most socially vulnerable, so that when we move forward with climate action implementation, that we are prioritizing solutions in those communities. The second piece of the climate action plan that I would like for folks to take away is that the plan includes ambitious actions across 7 different sectors, from buildings, energy, transportation, to climate governance, sequestration, climate adaptation, as well as public engagement. And there's some actions in the plan that are quite aggressive, such as the building energy performance standard for existing commercial buildings and multifamily buildings. This is one of the first policies out of the gate that we've worked on. It's already before council, under their review. The plan also includes an action for ways to disincentivize and eliminate the use of natural gas in new buildings. In the transportation chapter, there is a call. This is more of an advocacy action because this would require state action, but looking at a vehicle carbon tax or a vehicle miles traveled tax. And then in the clean energy section, there's community choice energy, which is essentially putting the county government in the position to serve as the energy supplier on behalf of our community, and give us the ability to purchase more renewable energy on behalf of county residents. One of the sections of the climate action plan that I'm particularly excited about is our chapter on climate governance, and that has to do with setting up that organizational backbone, that organizational structure, to allow us to put climate change considerations front and center in decision making. So that includes climate budgeting. How are we incorporating climate considerations in our annual operating budget and capital budget processes, as well as the convening of a Maryland Climate Coalition of local governments. We're looking at some ways to partner with other counties, with other municipalities throughout the state, so that together we have a greater voice, before the Public Service Commission, before the General Assembly, and can, influence and leverage those decisions much more so than if we were doing it individually, within, just with our own jurisdictions alone.
So, this is a long list still, and I was trying to get you to narrow that down and tell me, can you say what the county government is doing in priority? Like, this is what we're doing today. This is what you're doing tomorrow. This is what you're doing there. What are those, like, the immediate, since there is a climate emergency, right? So what is the emergency steps? I
wish that I was able to say, this is the one thing we're doing now, and we're going to do it, and we're going to start and finish it, and then we're going to go to the next thing in a linear way. But unfortunately, the climate emergency is upon us now. And an analogy that I've used from time to time is that really we're an octopus. We have these, various tentacles, and we are working across multiple areas at the same time. The best place to look to see, what are we doing near term? What are all the actions that we're taking on immediately is our fiscal year 22 climate work plan. And that outlines 75 actions we have underway currently this fiscal year, which just started last month, to make progress on, the climate action plan. So the climate action plan as a whole has 86 actions. We're taking steps forward on 75 out of those 86.
I'm a political scientist, right? And I study public policy, I study public administration, and I know that, when you're doing everything, you're not doing very much. That's one of the lessons that I have drawn from the literature. So when you say you're doing 75, right, it seems like, that's, dissipated effort across many, many areas. Is there a focus to all of this?
So, I think you bring up a good point in that, if there's a small group of people trying to do 75 things like in 1 year, like how do you actually manage to get that done, right? And so I recognize that we needed to reorganize ourselves for implementing the climate action plan, and that, a team of 7 people alone cannot get it done. And so we have gone through the process of identifying what I'm calling climate action plan implementation groups. Some groups are focused solely on making progress on a single action. For example, community choice energy. There's a whole group of people, center on that one action. There are other groups that can cluster or theme, around a set of actions, and kind of making progress on that. And so we have probably, I would say, 12 to 15 of these different implementation groups with a variety of colleagues from throughout county governments and departments. And those various groups have different leads.
Let's talk about actually the energy, building energy performance standards, right? That's our second big centerpiece program. And you have led the process in DC as well, I believe, right? When DC had the BEPS process, is that correct?
Yeah, I can't claim personal credit for shepherding that process in DC, but some very well-qualified colleagues did that.
Okay, all right, so that's good. So, the BEPS process, the Building Energy Performance Standards, only applies to commercial buildings and large buildings. That means it applies to apartment buildings. It applies mainly a lot to renters who are, people that probably have lesser income than others who live in single-family homes. The county is mostly single-family homes, and you've essentially exempted the richer parts of the county, the richer people in the county, from emission standards, from building emission standards, and you are imposing a cost on those that can least afford it. And you are obviously talking about racial equity and social justice. How does all this square up?
Well, first, what I would say is, nobody is exempted from the, requirements that are called out in the climate action plan.
No, but single-family homes are not part of the building energy performance standards.
They're part of the climate action plan. So the plan includes 86 actions. This one policy, the building energy performance standard, is one out of 86. And so we are going to be rolling out policies and programs, initiatives that cover, all of our sectors, as we move forward. This one particular action, that is before council right now, does target commercial buildings and multifamily buildings. It builds on an existing law that is already in place in the county, which is the Building Energy Performance, Building Energy Benchmarking Law. And so this builds upon and expands on that existing law. Doesn't mean that everybody else is exempt. It just means that they're not part of this particular bill that's before council currently. But okay. We are also looking at ways to improve the energy performance requirements for residential buildings as well. And there are actions in the building section of the climate action plan that speak to the residential sector.
What are you doing specifically to reduce energy emission, carbon emission from single-family homes?
So with regards to residential buildings, the climate action plan, if you look at the building chapter, has an action focused on electrification requirements for existing residential buildings. So some of the policies included here include a point of sale electrification requirement that can be paired with an energy audit ordinance, which would require residents who are selling their homes to conduct an energy audit and disclose the results before the sale.
Is that a law now?
This would be a change in law that would be required in order to be able to require electrification for existing residential buildings. This is not currently in place right now.
Right. So, I mean, a lot of homes have natural gas. What is the process? What is your theory of change here? I mean, how do you get them to electrify?
We like to start with incentives, right? We don't like to start with requirements from the get-go. And so I think that financially, if we're able to provide rebates and other forms of financial incentives to make it easier and cheaper for people to make that conversion, that is certainly a preference. But we know that incentives alone would not get the county to zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2035. And that is why, eventually requirements would need to be put in place. We know that it can be expensive, particularly for low and moderate income households. So whenever requirements such as this would be put in place, we would need to be in the position to provide substantial financial assistance to those households in particular.
So what is your plan to do that?
So that is not one of the 75 actions that we have underway this very first year. But with the Building Energy Performance Standard that is currently before Council, a first step is to bring together a group of stakeholders and to learn, about best practices. Have any other jurisdictions like Montgomery County put this in place so that we're not starting from scratch? Is there a good example out there that we can learn from? And then to start drafting a bill. And then, to have something ready, for a council introduction.
But Adriana, do you think we have these time for stakeholder meetings and this and that? This is an emergency.
Stakeholder input and community input is essential. Yes, it's an emergency, but we are a democracy. We don't rule by fiat. And we feel that it's fundamentally important to include in the conversation and in the formulation of the policies, members of our community, particularly members of our community who are going to be most, deeply impacted by policies. And that's why, in the development of the Building Energy Performance Standard, the Department of Environmental Protection staff who worked on that bill, they hosted stakeholder meetings over, many months and helped in, formulating that policy. I feel like this is a really important point you bring up around, hey, is stakeholder involvement even, that important? Can we do away with it? We are really, within our climate action team, making some strides to change our model of engagement, because we found that some members of our community have much more social capital than others. They have the ability to volunteer for stuff. They have the ability and time to, participate in 7 to 9 p.m. Zoom meetings and not be compensated for it. But that really excludes a large segment of our community. And to just kind of put a finer point on it, we have a very incredibly diverse county. One of the probably most diverse in the entire country. But we have found that with kind of traditional community engagement approaches, scheduling a 7 to 9 p.m. Zoom meeting on a Tuesday night, when you look around the room or the virtual room, you're not seeing that diversity reflected. And so we are excited about one of the actions in the Climate Action Plan, which is development of something that we're tentatively calling the Community Justice Academy, which is a way to partner with and compensate members of our community who are most deeply impacted by climate change and have them help us identify what are their localized needs and what are their project ideas, and have them help us to, co-create and formulate those projects, those initiatives, with the county providing support, but the county not necessarily in the driver's seat. We all have a role to play here.
philosophically, do you think democracy impedes climate action?
I think it's certainly, democracy takes time, right? It's not.
What if we don't have
immediate.
the time? What do we do then? Do you change your democratic practice in order to be able to meet emergency?
I think we have to continually find ways to be more nimble. But at the same time, we need to find ways to bring more people along.
Well, I agree with you. I'm not saying that you should jettison democracy at any rate, but I am just wondering if it is time now to change your democratic practice in order to achieve climate action and bring people along. What is that?
Well, I think transparency certainly plays a big role. For example, within the climate action plan, we call for the implementation of an environmental or climate impact statement, so that when bills come before council for decision making, that there be some analysis included about what are the climate or greenhouse gas emission impacts of this decision. So I think that putting something like that in place will help inform decision making, help for more informed decision making.
And yet, after all of this, I appreciate your stakeholder engagement, by the way. But after all of this, I have to wonder why BEPS has the first shot at this, where renters and poorer families are going to be more affected, because obviously the building owners are not going to keep, sort of pay for this themselves. They're going to pass it on to renters. And those renters are going to be the most impacted by the BEPS costs. But single family homes, where presumably somewhat better off people live, right? There, we don't have a plan yet.
So, building energy performance standards for commercial and multifamily buildings it's not like it's going to, come online tomorrow and the requirements are going to be put in place next year. These are long-term targets. We're looking to get these buildings to comply by 2035. We want to give these buildings a long lead time, because capital improvements to buildings, they don't come up every year. These buildings need time to plan ahead. This puts those building types in the best position to plan ahead, for the medium future, between now and 2035. And so similarly, on other policies coming in place, we're not able to require people to make these changes overnight. These are, pricey things. If this was cheap and easy, we would have done it already.
But with, say, natural gas ban, right? So in new homes, for example, in new single family homes, for example, that would require a state law change. And obviously, you're putting together a coalition of municipal governments that will demand state law change. Where are you with that? How many people are joining you? How many is there? What is the discussion around natural gas ban in particular?
Sure. So we think, according to what our county lawyers have told us, that that a change in the state law would be required. However, one of our state delegates thinks that may not actually be the case, that the county may have the authority to do it on its own. And so currently the state attorney general is reviewing that issue. And we should hear back in a couple of weeks and get some further clarity as to whether the county already has authority to move forward, or whether indeed we would need to go to the state for that request for that law to be changed.
A lot of this seems aspirational, however. The issue is that there's a standard set that 2035 you want zero to be net zero, right? The climate action plan is a shorter term plan, but it is not such a short term plan that you have immediate plans right now. And many of the things that are being done slowly, and you're focused on process rather than on outcomes, right? So are we going to get to that goal that the county set, do you think?
So, our task with the climate action plan is what is required of us to achieve the goal that was set out by County Council. Our goal, admittedly, is one of the most ambitious anywhere in the country and in the world, right? And so is it, would I bet on it that we're 100% going to achieve that goal by 2035? No. But the county executive has made it very clear that, if we had set a more achievable goal, a lower target, let's say, we're just going to reduce emissions by another 30% by 2030. We would have, of course, a much easier time getting there, and maybe we wouldn't be working as hard. But because we have this, incredibly audacious goal, it's all we think about. It's all we, day and night, literally, for the team. And I think it helps to, change the frame of thinking, and that we need to do bigger things and we need to do them sooner. And so I think that in and of itself, has an incredibly important value of like motivating action.
Okay. What challenges do you think lie ahead of you in this respect?
So I think that there are three main challenges. The first one, the huge one, is funding, right? On the one hand, we're not starting fully from scratch, from zero. The county does have some dollars already available. County departments are already working on this. We also have a climate change non-departmental account that funds several of our climate planning and action efforts. But we know that, county dollars are not sufficient, to do all that needs to be done. And so we're going to need to significantly leverage, private sector resources, state and federal sector, grant and loan opportunities as well. And one of the things that's really exciting about the Biden administration is how much focus he has already placed on climate change. And, fingers crossed, with the infrastructure bill coming across the finish line soon, hopefully, that is going to open up a lot of funding to local jurisdictions to focus on climate. And already the FEMA hazard mitigation grant with their upcoming grant cycle, really for the first time, they're providing or including a heavy emphasis on climate change in projects that are going to be eligible for funding.
Does Montgomery County have any FEMA grant applications ready?
So we are working on that. The first deadline to the Maryland Emergency Management Agency is coming up in a couple of weeks. And I have done a review of the climate action plan to look for opportunities that dovetail nicely with FEMA grant dollars. Can
you give me an example?
So, this is still, we're still kind of, in the brainstorming stage, right? So nothing set in stone, but things like funding for resiliency hubs. So these are community centers that, in the event of a power outage neighborhood-wide, they would have electricity up and running. They would be, be able to be islanded, from the grid.
How does that help climate action is what I want to know. It's great. It's very important. It's a disaster management tool, absolutely necessary. But how does that help climate action?
So, climate action, it's not just about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, although that is incredibly important. It's also about becoming more resilient to a changing climate. And that has a big focus in the climate action plan as well. The climate change is already here, right? It's not waiting around for us to, finish putting everything in place. And so we need to be ready for the impacts. The impacts are already coming hard and fast, and this is just a prelude of what's to come. And so we need to be able to, help our residents who are going to be impacted by, flooding events and by power outages and heat emergencies.
Good. So this is a recovery issue, not a prevention issue.
Right. FEMA hazard mitigation grants are focused on the resilience and adaptation side of the equation.
All right. What about the Biden infrastructure bill? What are the grants? What projects are we pushing? Is the county pushing for the infrastructure bill that'll support climate action?
So it's that one. It's not quite at the finish line yet. So as soon as it's at the finish line, we want to be well positioned to dive into what are the.
Okay. Let me rephrase. What would you like to see funded?
Sure. So I have, I feel like a little bit like a kid in a candy shop, like if I could have anything I want, what would I want? So I want to see more funding for expanding tree planting, across the county, and in prioritizing neighborhoods in the county that are the least served, by tree canopy currently. I want to see funding go towards wetlands restoration throughout the county. More funding towards culvert repair and updating our drainage infrastructure. I'd like to see us install temperature monitoring stations throughout the county. We need to do some more research in extreme weather and energy efficient building codes. We would like to update our codes to design to the 500-year storm. We need to assess our flood rescue resources. Are they sufficient?
Okay, so I just want to know, do you have any prevention types of projects that you would like funded? I understand these are all sort of adaptation and recovery projects that you're looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. So to go back to building energy performance standards, we want to be able to be positioned to provide buildings in challenged sectors like affordable housing with the financial resources and technical assistance support that they need to make these, sometimes very expensive upgrades that they're going to need to make to their buildings to improve their energy performance over time. Do
you have a sense of how much it'll cost?
There's still some studies underway. The county has contracted with a consultant to look at per building type. What are the expected costs? So we don't have final results quite yet, but we can expect that the costs may be substantial, primarily for buildings that are currently using natural gas and that would need to move away from natural gas and electrify.
And this would be only for large buildings, not for single family homes.
Yeah, I mean, if I had all the resources in the world.
The natural gas ban requires state action, right? Probably, it looks likely that it would. Currently, County Executive Eldridge has a difficult relationship with Governor Hogan, and we need state action to get a natural gas ban. How do we get around this politically?
These are challenging, thorny questions. I think the governor's term is coming up soon, and I realistically, I don't think that such a ban on natural gas would pass in this upcoming General Assembly cycle. It's an election year, but I think we can certainly start teeing up the issue. Sometimes it takes a couple of years for an issue to kind of gain ground before the General Assembly. And so I think the field is wide open, and who knows who the next governor is going to be and what their leanings and inclinations will be.
Okay, so hopefully a new governor will change things. I read a very interesting proposal in the I don't know if it's in the 75 or 86 or whatever, but it's the stormwater retention trading. Are you working? Is that part of 75 or 86? I mean, are you working on it now or later? That
is in the climate action plan. It's not one of the actions we're taking immediate steps on this year. But DC, again, I kind of look back to DC as a model for a lot of this stuff. Maybe I'm partial to it because I used to work there. They do
they have Department of Energy and Environment in DC is really extraordinary. There is no doubt about that.
Yeah, it's really incredible. Yeah.
And we are behind. I mean, that's I think part of the frustration is that, why are we behind?
Well, I think we do often compare ourselves to DC because they're our neighbors. It's a little bit of an unfair comparison because DC is, even though they're not quite yet recognized as the 51st state, they do serve as a state body in many ways. Yeah. So whereas, in the state of Maryland, when federal grants flow down, they often land at the state level and then the state disperses them to various jurisdictions. DC gets to serve as a city, but it also gets to be the direct recipient of these federal funds. And so DOEE, Department of Energy and Environment, has incredible amount of resources available to it that in Maryland would, be split across, 20 different ways.
And the Montgomery County Department of Environmental Protection does not have those resources?
No, does not. It has
How
a
do
small
you bring
fraction.
those resources to DEP then?
So we need to, and we already are, but we need to, be even more aggressive in applying for state grants. So, such as from the, the Department of the Environment or the Maryland Energy Administration. But, those are competitive grants. They're open to, jurisdictions across the state. Sometimes and oftentimes we're successful, but, sometimes we're not. And we just have to continue to, apply for those opportunities, as well as, leverage private sector resources. So Montgomery County has the first local level green bank in the nation. Just yesterday, I got a chance to participate in a groundbreaking event that they had for community solar at Paddington Square Garden Apartments. And because of the green bank, they were able to bring in private sector partners and make that project pencil out.
These are big changes that you're asking. These are difficult things that we have to do, and it requires, very strong leadership. Do you think we have that leadership?
I think we do. I think, County Executive Arridge, he is a deep environmentalist. He cares deeply about climate change. He was the one that created this position that I now serve in. The county never before had a person in a central role, within the county executive's office, whose sole job was focused on, climate change initiatives. And so, he cares about the issue. He has empowered us to be aggressive in moving forward. And he challenges a lot, when we go to brief him and we offer him, let's say 3 or 4 different options for, how to move forward. He always goes for the most aggressive one.
All of that may be true, but he also works with the council. And so could you speak broadly to county leadership, not just to the county executive?
Sure. So, it was the county council that voted unanimously for the climate emergency resolution, which set the goals of, achieving 0 greenhouse gas emissions by 2035 and an 80% reduction by 2027. Most of those council members are still sitting council members and consider themselves to be environmentalists. So I think that we do, have a lot of support, within the county leadership.
But then why is action so slow? If we have all the leadership, if we have the instruments in place, why is action so slow?
I do wish that council would move on things a bit faster. We did put the building energy performance standard has been with them since April. They have had a public hearing on it. They have some, work sessions on it. I hope that they will move swiftly to pass that legislation in the fall. We also proposed the adoption of the 2018 International Green Construction Codes.
What can you do to make that happen? It's one thing to hope for something, but another thing to make it happen.
I don't rule over council, right? I work on the executive side. I think the best we can do is, hope to influence them. And that's why we need, community support. All of our leadership, in a democracy, everybody's elected and everybody is responsible to our residents. So I really urge, if the residents think that things are not moving fast enough, we want to hear from you. Let us know.
Adriana Hochberg, thank you very much. Good luck with meeting your ambitious goals in the Climate Action Plan.
Thank you so much, Sunil. It was a pleasure.
What lessons can we draw from my conversation with Adriana Hochberg? First, if you listen closely to the interview, you will see that Adriana Hochberg and the Eldridge administration are playing the art of the possible. The Climate Action Plan is a slow, deliberative, educative process, not revolutionary, transformative, or emergency action promised by the proclamation of a climate emergency the county announced a few years back. Second, if you listen even more carefully, you will see that the Montgomery County Climate Action Plan is more focused on adaptation and even conservation over prevention, particularly of carbon emission. This is not, on the face of it, extraordinary. Carbon emission is a global and national problem, hardly local in its manifestation. And typically, few local governments have had any success or intent to tackle them. Further, adaptation and conservation actions appear to have greater political support among residents. They often meet multiple challenges, including most dramatically social and economic inequities. Adaptation measures lend themselves to addressing historical equity challenges. But in Montgomery County, activists are not satisfied with resilience and recovery alone. They want prevention. The declaration of climate emergency seemed like a good idea in 2018, but it seems to have set a standard that our political process just cannot meet. Third, it is notable that Adriana Hochberg emphasizes stakeholder input and democratic process as critical. And really, who can argue with that? But should democratic processes not change in the face of emergency? Not for nothing that political science as a discipline has long looked at the consequences of disasters on representative government. Time after time, democracy has failed both because it could not adapt its processes to disasters, but also because it changed too much and became authoritarian instead. It is also notable that the current process isn't working either. The Building Energy Performance Standards, one of the marquee county programs, is entirely focused on commercial and apartment buildings to the exclusion of single-family homes, which constitute the vast majority of housing in the county. Who lives in apartment buildings that now have to meet more expensive energy standards? Generally, apartment dwellers tend to have lower income. So despite the county's focus on equity, it is not able to live up to it. Fourth, though I didn't talk with Adriana Hochberg about how she interacted with climate activists, what she did not say is important. So yes, the county wants to take 75 actions in an octopus-like fashion. But that list is really a reflection of the 75 different activist groups, or at least 75 different activist demands that were made on the county. There isn't consensus among climate activists about what needs to be tackled on an emergency basis. One climate group in the county delivered a 50-page response to the draft of the Climate Action Plan. If activists can't come to an agreement, how can government? Before you try to answer that, this one, too, is one for the ages, a political science conundrum.
Some folks get more extreme and go on a hunger strike. But I love food much too much.
That's all for this episode. Music for this episode comes from Seth Kibel, a Washington, D.C. and Baltimore-based musician, producer, and arranger with an astonishing range from blues and jazz to klezmer and reggae. He performs with several bands in the Washington, D.C. area. I say this in every episode, and here I go again. I'm very much looking forward to showcasing local talent and especially local music students on the podcast. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone who might want to, please email us at ihppod@gmail.com or reach out on Twitter at ihppod. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and your home. See you next time.
If he swapped the phone for his pen, what would Alex Hamilton write over some pretty sick beat?